Well, thanks, Jeff. And I should say that actually, it's Jeff's idea to have this program, and I give him a lot of credit for that. At the end of last year, he suggested that we make our half-day event, which traditionally is kind of a hard skills sort of type of nuts and bolts event, that we kind of go more for something a little more innovative. Let's say a soft skills event with discussions of emotional intelligence and mindfulness. You could call it touchy-feely, but I'll stay away from that. And we also, along with getting that together, we were able to find 3 great speakers who have actually traveled from Virginia, Florida, and Tennessee to speak here today and making this event possible. Now, the format today is 3 different speakers, each presenting on both, I would say, traditional, non-traditional, innovative skills for personal and career development for in-house counsel. And I'm kind of going to go through all of the speakers now and give you an idea of their background and what they'll be speaking on. Our first speaker is Fred Krebs. Fred is adjunct professor of law at Georgetown Law School. He's also senior fellow at the Center for the Study of the Legal Profession at the law school. He's been a really incredible influence on the ACC over the years. He served as our president from 1991 to 2011. He remains a really valued senior advisor of the ACC, and leading into that, he worked on a project with the ACC to produce its first executive report, Skills for the 21st Century General Counsel. And that is available on our website, that report, and I encourage you to seek it out. At any rate, he will be today presenting on the findings of that report, the presentation being skill sets for the GC of the future. Our second speaker is Stephen Roth, who is Vice President and General Counsel of Jewelry Television, a company that apparently will play a significant role in his presentation. He's also, I'm happy to say, a huge fan of Formula One racing, and he and I will be debating the relative merits of Lewis Hamilton versus Nico Rosberg during the reception. Steve, actually the way we got Steve was that Steve was on a panel this fall at the ACC annual meeting that presented on emotional intelligence. This was an absolutely packed event that I unfortunately missed, but I heard the reviews were really raved. The feedback was incredible. So we begged and demanded him to drag himself up from Nashville for his presentation today, Why Smart Lawyers Fail, Increasing Your Emotional Intelligence and Your Impact. And then our final speaker is going to be Scott Rogers. When we decided we wanted a mindfulness speaker, we were looking for someone who really had been there at the beginning and who was well established in the field. And we found one in Scott. He's the founder and director of the Institute for Mindfulness Studies and of the University of Miami School of Law's Mindfulness in Law program. I really didn't even know one existed, but it's probably a good thing. Scott was one of the originators of the application of mindfulness to both the law school curriculum and the practice of law. Scott's presentation today will be Mindfulness in Law, the cultivation of focus, concentration, and the reduction of stress. And that last part sounds really good. So anyway, here's to a really great, enjoyable, and useful program. And let's start by welcoming Fred Krebs.
Thank you, Simon and Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here. I always like getting out like this. It gives me a chance to make new friends, new acquaintances, and see a number of reconnect with old friends and old acquaintances, several whom I had the privilege of working with while I was at ACC, and they're in the room today. Some former board members and former chair, and it's just it's a pleasure for me to be out here. I'm happy to talk to you a little bit about the study that ACC had done. It's called Skills for the 21st Century General Counsel, and my remarks are going to be based primarily on that report, and then also we'll pick up a little bit about what I'd say I just picked up over the 20-some years that I had the privilege of working with the in-house community. And this research project is one, as was noted, it's available to ACC members for free. If you're not an ACC member, it's available for purchase. I'll tell you, it's cheaper to join ACC and get it for free than it is to buy it. So I would encourage you to take a look at it if you have any interest in it whatsoever. But it was, and it is, what I would say is the most extensive research project of its type. Certainly there's a lot out there about skill sets for general counsel, but this one went into a great depth in its research. We conducted surveys. We had a survey and had over 650 responses from ACC members from around the world. We also surveyed members of the National Association of Corporate Directors to get the director, a client perspective. In addition to that, we had a focus group at one of the ACC annual meetings, and we conducted 28 in-depth interviews with former and current GCs, directors, CEOs, and a couple legal futurists, and then some headhunters. And the nice part about this is what we ended up with is something that's like a 360 review of the CLO or general counsel position. And so it is, as I mentioned, one of the most extensive projects of its type. And we learned a great deal as we were going through and doing it. And also, I have to say, I had a lot of fun working on it. And so, as you'll learn later, having fun and also maintaining your sanity and things like that are also just important to being a good lawyer. And so what I'm going to give you is a little bit of the overview of skill sets for the general counsel of the future, and then the speakers who follow me, as you know, they're going to delve into a couple of very specific topics and go into in depth of something that I think is quite significant. But the interesting thing about this is 5 or 10 years ago, you never would have had a program like this. And what you're seeing is the change and how the world is evolving and how things are changing for the legal profession and for in-house lawyers. Now, if I could summarize the report, there it is, and I'm going to start my talk. I'm going to try to take the business approach to this, and I'm going to give you the conclusions first, hit you with all of that, then we're going to go into more detail. And so the key takeaways from this talk that I'm going to give. And the summary of the report is that you have to be more than a lawyer if you wanted to have a tagline. And it's not that you're not a lawyer, but lawyer and being a good lawyer and having legal skills, that's the price of admission. And then that's the foundation. You build upon that. And it's from that you start adding other hats, other responsibilities, and performing other tasks. One of the other things that we discovered was that the role is evolving, and evolving significantly, and it's evolving rapidly. Now, also, if we were going to talk about where is the profession going, or what the skill sets of the general counsel of the future are going to be, you needed to have some assessment of what they are now. Where, if you want to know where you're going, you have to have at least some idea where you're starting from. And our analysis, we came up with what we refer to as value buckets. And there's 3 value buckets in the way that a general counsel and a CLO provide value to an organization. They provide value as the leader and the manager of the law department. And that's the closest thing to being the traditional lawyer role. Secondly, they provide value as serving as counselor-in-chief, and you're counselor-in-chief to the C-suite and the board. And that's the trusted advisor role. And the third role, or the third way that you provide value, is as a strategist. And this is the area where there's been the greatest evolution, the greatest change from what has been the traditional role of the lawyer. And that is both coming from as a legal strategist, but moving into being a business strategist as well, and having business responsibilities. And so that is the area that is changing the most, and it is the most different from what we had seen previously. And also, what we learned, or what did we learn from directors and the interviews? Well, what we learned is they value GCs who are strategists. And when asked about the performance of the GCs and were they satisfied and so on, the good part was virtually all of them were satisfied or very satisfied with the performance of the GC in their organization. However, there was a direct correlation between those that were highly satisfied and those whose GCs performed or provided that strategic function or provided value as a strategist. The second thing that we learned from the directors, again, legal skills, that's the price of admission. That's table stakes. If you don't have, that's what gets you in the door, that's the floor. You start there, that's an assumption, it's a given, however you want to say it. But the point is, it's assumed that you know something about the law. It's assumed that you're a good lawyer. Now they're going to be looking at other things. And so that was, I don't think that surprised us that much, but it was very definite in what we discovered. And then the other kind of interesting factoid that came up was GCs grade themselves much higher as strategists than directors do. And we thought, well, that's good, but maybe some rigorous self-assessment here might be in order, and just maybe a sense of realism about this. But both GCs and directors saw providing an increased role of providing strategic advice, an increased role in strategy, and primarily on the business side, is something that from 5 years from now, that demand is only going to go up. The research also revealed some consistent themes, and I categorize these, and I've also seen this through my years with ACC, and I referred to it as when you're looking at a general counsel or a CLO, that the traits or the characteristics, you're going to see the 4 C's. And the first C is they're going to be comfortable with ambiguity. And that is, you don't always have all the information that you need. It's not always a clear, bright line. There's gray areas. You're able to make decisions without having a bright line, all the information that you need. There is some ambiguity. There's some doubt as to the outcome. Secondly, there is communication. And communication skills, and we'll talk about this in much more detail in a few minutes, and I think my following speakers will be addressing it as well. But the communication skills are absolutely critical, and it is, you see it, if you can't communicate, you can be as smart as, you can be the smartest guy in the room or the smartest gal in the room. If you can't communicate and communicate effectively, then it's really of little value. And curiosity. Curiosity is a very important characteristic and trait. And it's this curiosity, and it's a desire just to learn. It's a desire to understand something. It's a desire to get that little bit more information. And curiosity is very, very important, and will be increasingly for the general counsel of the future, because what curiosity also entails is a continuous learning, and a desire with the continuous learning and continuous improvement. And then courage. And you've all had the courses or been to the seminars about your professional responsibility, and it's the organization as the client, and you have to have the courage to say, this is the wrong thing, and I'm going to resign and walk away from my job. The fact of the matter is yes, those are very, very real, and there is a tension there, but it doesn't happen very often. And so when it does, obviously, you need to have the courage to act. But courage also manifests itself in other ways. The willingness to make a decision, the willingness to live with the result. When you're managing people, to take risks and have the courage on a project to say yes, not just no. You have to have the courage to say no, but you also have the courage to say yes when it's in an ambiguous situation, or you're not certain, or you're taking an amount of risk. The courage to fire somebody when you're a manager. You're having a huge impact on people's lives when you do that. You have to have the courage to do that and be willing to do that. And then what came up in the research was perhaps the single most trait or characteristic, single most important trait or characteristic, and that is judgment. And judgment, as one person said to me, they said, judgment's like a sense of humor. Everybody thinks they have it, but they don't necessarily have it. But judgment is at the end of the day, it helps you prevent problems. It helps you solve problems when they occur. Basically, it's the judgment. That's what an organization looks to you for to make decisions or to help the organization and to have judgment when you're making your decisions. And that's what the organization basically wants. And judgment applies in everything that you do. It applies to all the value buckets that I was talking about a few minutes ago, and which I'll be talking about again. And how do you get judgment? Well, judgment comes from experience. And how do you get experience? Well, you get experience by handling difficult matters and difficult situations. And from that, you make mistakes, or doing that, you make mistakes. So judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from making mistakes. But the critical component there is that you learn from those mistakes, and that you don't repeat the mistakes. And I'm sure all of you have worked with people, and you wonder, how come they keep doing the same thing over and over again, or making the same mistake? And I'm not sure there, but certainly a lack of judgment. And so for the general counsel, and if you're interested and you're wanting to be in a position like that, judgment is an absolutely critical component, and it is what the organization, I would say again, probably desires more than anything else. Judgment. There was a line. Napoleon was asked what was the most important characteristic in a general that he looked for. His response was luck. And in our case, so I think what we're looking for is judgment, not luck. So, the value buckets. Let's talk about them, and I'll go through them. And by the way, I do have some time for questions at the end, but if somebody has a question as we're going along, I'm happy to try to answer it for you, or at least indicate that I'll be covering that in a moment. So if as I'm going along you have a question, just raise your hand, and as I said, I'll try to answer it. So the value buckets, what are they? The leader of the law department, again, the counselor-in-chief, and the legal and the business strategist. And as I said, the GC of the future, as this indicates, the GC of the future has to be more than a lawyer, but you start as a lawyer. And so the first level there is you are the leader of the law department. And you're that leader, and that law department may have one person in it, you, and perhaps one administrative assistant or assistant of some type, or paralegal or something, or it may have 500 people and 500 lawyers and a huge support staff, or somewhere in between. Still, you're the leader of the law department, and the skill sets that the report and the research in our report brought forth or identified. There's several. The three most important mentioned it already. And that is curiosity. And that's this, with the curiosity, we frequently say, and I heard this from almost day one when I got to ACC, and it was that there was an inherent advantage in being an in-house lawyer. And that inherent advantage is to know the company. You know the organization better than outside counsel. Well, if that's true, then you have to, as Captain Picard said, you have to make it so. And one of the ways that you make it so is curiosity. And it's not just there's more than just knowing the brand or what the company makes. The curiosity, you really have to understand the business. You have the organization. You have to understand the culture. You have to understand what makes it tick. You have to understand, most fundamentally, how does it make its money? And how do the people work and what it does? And if you want to be a top flight GC, you have to understand that. I look back at days when I was in-house and I was practicing, and I was reviewing contracts, and I was giving advice on things. And I was going through, and this "the" should be an "and," and this kind of stuff. And I didn't have a clue what the actual thing was that we were selling. And I look back on it, and I think, wow, that was, it was almost criminal. Fortunately, nothing bad happened. But I didn't really grasp that, at least at first. And so if you want to give good legal advice, or if you want to ask people to do something, you're trying to solve a problem in the organization, if you don't understand how it really operates, your solutions can be, the cure can be worse than the disease. So you have to have the curiosity, and then you have to understand the business. Secondly, it's all about a team. You cannot do this yourself. And over in the interviews that we conducted and in the people that as we talked with them, it came out about the general counsel and how important it was that that individual, he or she, develop a team, and that they have the ability to identify, the ability to hire, the ability to develop, the ability to motivate, and the ability to retain people and a team. And this is a team that, again, depending upon the nature of your department, it may be all internal, or more likely it's going to be some internal and some external. And so you're going to have a blend. And also, to a certain degree as well, it came up, and I'll speak to this in a few minutes, about collaboration and the ability to interact with people outside of your department. But it's also cross-departmental, and what sort of team that you build outside of your department, the specifics of your department. So it's both internal and external, but it's about people. Again, to develop, to retain, and in some instances, fire. The hardest thing to do if you're a manager, at least in my case, the hardest thing I ever had to do was to fire people. Fortunately, I didn't have to very often, but a couple of times it happened. It's extremely difficult to do. And usually when I looked at it, I thought frequently it was my fault because I put these people in the wrong position, or I somehow failed to help develop them, and I felt it was at least as much my fault as theirs. But to look at this, you need to be able to do that, and I think particularly in the concept of emotional intelligence, becomes very, very important when you're operating in this particular setting. Third, when you're running and managing your department, you have to have management skills. And aside from the people management, you're now talking about budget management, project management, process management, all of these sorts of things. One of the newest buzz terms is project management, and to learn how to do things in that. In some ways, it's not all that difficult. Of course, all of these things, by the way, as I talk about them, all of them are very simple to talk about. They're much more difficult to actually implement. They're much more difficult to actually live and to do. But it can be done because people do it. But you have to have strong budget management skills. And one of the things the research showed, though, is there wasn't as much talk about it, particularly in the surveys when we were asking what are the value drivers, and cost and managing costs were relatively low, and we were, as a value driver, and we were trying to figure out why is this, because of all the attention that's paid. The chapter has programs on this, ACC has programs, everybody has programs on legal expenditures and cost and all of this stuff. And what came to us as we were doing the focus groups and the interviews was it was reaching the place in a way similar to basic legal skills, in that it was almost table stakes. It was assumed. It was, if you're going to be a general counsel and you have a department and you've got management responsibilities, it's going to be assumed and it's expected that you can manage a budget. And so, and it's really, there's something, and it's like really managing a budget, not just making up a number and then changing it as you go along. But managing a budget and managing projects. So it's sort of like on time and on budget. And so those were the skills that kept coming up very, very important as you're doing your, as you're providing that or filling that value bucket of leading the law department. One of the other aspects from leading the law department is sort of demand management. And by that I mean understanding and being able to respond to the demand from the client and making realistic choices. And we'll talk about this in a little bit about the strategic planning and how you use the law department. But aligning and making the best use of the skills and the talents and what the lawyers want and can do with what the client wants. And sometimes they don't match up. And so you have to figure out, are you, with your law department, do you have the right skills? Are you doing the right things? Or is there some sort of communication, education process going on there with the client that you might need to help gently educate the client as well? Usually it's going to be someplace in between. Lawyers, unfortunately, will get into habits and they like to do something and they like to keep doing it and they get good at it and they keep doing it, but that may not, over time, they may not necessarily be what is most valuable for the organization. And that's where you have to, as a manager, you've got to start making strategic choices, which I'll speak to in just a moment. The second value bucket is the general counsel as counselor-in-chief. And by counselor-in-chief, that means you're counseling, that's the trusted advisor, and you're counseling the C-suite and the board. And it's increasingly the board is looking to the GC for this particular role, much in response to Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, and all of the various activities and regulations that are coming out relating to corporate governance. And board members are a little antsy about some of this and what's their role and what they're supposed to be doing and how they're doing it. And they're looking increasingly to the general counsel to fulfill that particular role. And as I said, this is kind of the classic trusted advisor. And one of the items that came out of the research was that the more experienced GCs identified this as a particular value driver, and that they saw this counseling role, and they were acting as kind of the sage. And at one put it, quite honestly, he said, my counseling role many times is simply a listening role. I'm a sounding board for the CEO, and the CEO comes in and talks and basically talks something through and then walks out and is satisfied. And he said, most of the time I just sat there and listened and was performing that role. And so, it is this role, and to do this, and I'll come to certain personal traits and personal attributes, but to do this, you have to be able to communicate. And one of the most important aspects of communication is the ability to listen. And unfortunately, let's just say that's a challenge for many lawyers. Many lawyers think they're the smartest person in the room. Frequently, they may well be the smartest person in the room. They don't necessarily have to let everybody know that they're the smartest person in the room, or talk. As somebody said, if you go in and do all the talking, you won't know any more when the meeting's over than you did at the start. And so the ability to listen is very, very important, a very important aspect of communication, because it's the nuances sometimes, and the ability to listen, and then you can speak and figure out precisely what the communicator, what the client actually needs or wants, and what the issue is. And sometimes it's not what it appears to be on the surface. And so that listening ability is important. And on the communication side, you also have, some people, they have a heft. They've got gravitas. They speak for me, it's if you have an English accent, anything you say, and it just sounds good to me. But you have this gravitas, and you speak, and people are willing to listen because you project a confidence, you project that you know something. And the headhunters said this, that when they're speaking with someone, when they're evaluating a candidate, one of the things they're thinking about is, can I see that person in the room at a Fortune 100 board of directors, and can I see them speaking with authority and being listened to? And so that is a skill that one has to develop. And then, as I spoke a little bit ago, this idea of courage. And the courage to say yes, no, preserving your professional independence. I think you all know that. You all know it's the organization as the client. You all know that the CEO or someone that you're working with is also the person that does your evaluation and the person that can hire and fire you and so on. And there's a tension there, and there's a balancing that has to go on. So you've got to be part of the team, and you want to be involved, and you've got to do all of these things, but you at the same time have to maintain your professional independence and have that courage sometimes to speak up. One of the directors referred to it as, we all can rationalize decisions. And you can get yourself in a situation and you go down and you can rationalize what it is that you are going to do or what it is that you have done. And what I look to from my lawyers and my general counsel is someone who can rise above that, and someone who can get beyond the rationalization and can speak up and say what is right or what we should do, and has the courage to do that. And also one of the terms that came up frequently, integrity and a sense, a moral compass. And so that if you're going to be the trusted advisor, those were the skills that came up most frequently and with the most emphasis during the interviews and the research that we were doing. And then there's the general counsel as the strategist. And this is the area of greatest change. And yet most people don't think of lawyers as strategists, particularly business strategists, but some legal strategists as such. But lawyers and strategy boards, it was increasing, but it wasn't it wasn't the top one that they would look to necessarily for the contribution of lawyers. And yet one of the individuals, one of the legal futurists that we interviewed as we were talking with him, he said, what real strategy about is priorities and setting priorities. And what the skills that a lawyer has as being analytical and being able to assess risk and to break down and just to truly analyze things in a logical way lends itself to strategic thinking. And so that this is a role that the lawyer can play. And it's one that both directors and general counsel in the surveys indicated that they see and when we asked them 5 years in the future, what are you projecting? The lawyer as a strategist, an increasing role in developing strategy, was cited by both directors and general counsel. So if you're going to be a strategist, where can you be strategic? Well, the first place is with the law department, and that's the first place that you're likely to have the opportunity to be a strategist. And you can be strategic with how you run your law department. And part of that is you're setting priorities. Strategy is about priorities. Where are you going to put your resources? What comes first? So, how you're managing your legal spend. What sort of skills do you have in the department? Do you have the department skills that match up with the skills that the company needs? And now, does it have the skills that the company needs going forward? And if you're looking ahead as to what the goals are. Are what you are doing as a department, are you aligned with the company's goals and what it's trying to achieve? So that's the first place to start. The second is then using the law to advance corporate goals. This one is tricky and can be difficult, but there are some specific examples of it. Some companies are known, some of them that are in the regulatory, they operate in the regulatory area, and they're known as being particularly aggressive with their regulators about what the rules should be and what the law is, and either in regulatory matters or in aggressive litigation or in lobbying. And so that's one way that you're looking at what the law is or what you want it to be, and you're using and trying to align with using the law to align or achieve company goals. One of the specific examples that was given in the interviews that we did was with a company that the law department, in cooperation with the tax and the finance department, wanted to change how they treated their dividends. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to take the deduction for the dividend in the year that they declared the dividend, not the year that they paid it. Needless to say, the IRS had differing ideas regarding this, and they had extensive litigation. But at the end of the day, or actually at the end of about 10 years, they were successful. And the net result was a $200 million deduction coming a year earlier than getting it a year earlier than they would have under the old method. And so that was an example of sitting and saying, thinking about this and saying, okay, what might we do? How do we do this? How are we using the law to advance the goals of the organization? And then the third, and this was the area that had the most, as I said, as the area of most evolution, perhaps the most interest. And this is perhaps the greatest change in the role of the general counsel. For those of you that, I'll say of my era, my vintage, most of you aren't. Most of you are much younger. But there's a few of you running around, and I first met you when I first came to ACC, and looking back, and one of the conversations and the discussions when I first joined ACC was there would be a lot of discussion about the role of the lawyer and what hat you wore. And mostly they talked about two hats, not multiple hats, two hats. And basically you were a lawyer, or you did a lawyer and you did other things. And I would say approximately, this is anecdotal, but I would say almost 50%, certainly a significant number of people that when I first joined ACC, which was in the early 90s, is that they said they were lawyers, and that's what they did. That's all. And that's what they wanted to be. And business was for business. And they made the decisions, and you did the law. Well, that pendulum has swung. I mean, I'm certain that there are still operations and organizations that operate that way, and that's fine if that's what the organization wants. But looking ahead and where we are now, lawyers not only wear two hats, they wear multiple hats, and client expectations are looking at them to be, as the report says, more than a lawyer. And so that's where the biggest change that I would note in all of the things that we discovered in this. Indeed, there were relatively few surprises in this survey that we did. It's the differences from where things are now and where they were a few years ago are more of emphasis than they are of something totally or completely new, other than, I would say, on the strategy side. And that was, you were seeing much more, and the increased business perspective. And looking, you are a business person with a legal background. You're part of the executive team. You're in the C-suite. You're part of that. This is what they're looking to you for. And so how does that play out? Well, it plays out in ways that you're looking at an acquisition, or the company is moving forward, and you're trying to decide where you're going to go into develop a new product line or something, whatever it happens to be. And if you were looking at it from a strictly legal side of the equation, you'd be looking at it and you'd be, well, once you decide what to do, I'll tell you how to do it kind of conversation, or that's the role that you're playing. And as the one director put it, he said, there was a CEO that put it this way, is what I'm looking for now is that when I'm talking with my team, and I want to have a diverse team, I've got people around the table. There's folks with operations skill, and there's folks with marketing skill, and there's people with public affairs, and there's people with accounting and finance, and then there's you with the legal skill. And so I'm looking at you to bring that to me, and you add that particular skill to the equation. And so the discussion then is you have the what are we going to do, where are we going to go, or what are we going to do. Then you have the how. And the general counsel now is moving more into that what type of discussion, as well as, of course, the how and how one does that. And so I think that you have to, if you want to I'll rephrase this. If you look at it and going forward, the clear sense that I got from this is that those general counsel who are going to be on the cutting edge are going to be the ones that are involved in legal and business strategy as part of the executive team. And not everybody is going to be there. And indeed, I say, folks, whenever I'm giving talks in just about any particular area, any rule or any hard, fast statement that generalization that I make, I would almost immediately follow it with, I can go out and find you exceptions to that rule right away. So we're not a monolithic world. But there are changes, and this is the biggest area of change, and the role of the general counsel and strategy is the one that was perhaps the most striking finding in our research. So, talking about all these things that you're supposed to do, well, what are some of the specific skills and that? Well, you have a certain progression of skills as you go through your career. And the first level of skill, and this is mostly about being a lawyer, but that's you're efficient, you're dependable, and the no surprises rule. Certainly for me, when I was and I'll talk about my business experience, and it's a small, obviously it's running an association, even one the size of ACC, is still relatively small compared to the organizations that you're in. But nevertheless, we were a microcosm. We had to make business decisions. We had to do these sorts of things. And one of the rules I have is no surprises. I mean, you got to get to me. You got to tell me whatever. And as a lawyer, if you see a problem coming or something happen, you can't sit on it. You got to know when to come up, speak up. You got to handle the first part, the first level, and that's just being a good lawyer, I think. The second level is you start adding the skills. And if you decide, and not everybody does, some folks are quite happy and wish to remain focused in an area of a specialty and become exceptionally good at it, and they have productive and happy careers. But others want to move and make other changes and go off in other directions. And so if you are, the next level of skill is you've got to start to manage people. You've got to start to manage a budget. And you've got to learn to make decisions. It's not either or. At some point, as a lawyer, frequently it's this or this, and then someone else makes the decision. And you say, well, I think it's this or I think it's that. But you don't actually have the responsibility for the decision. You got to get to the point where you have the responsibility for the decision, and then you have to live with the decision. Again, I use my example. I came from essentially being a lobbyist and an in-house lawyer to running ACC. Very different situation when you feel a sense of responsibility for the people, for the budget, for all of these sorts of things. And that's, if you're doing this and you're thinking about that, that's the next level. That level of you're now able to manage a budget, you're able to manage people, and you get experience doing that. The third is you start hopefully being noted for your judgment. You start, you're able to, to recognize you've got vision. It's the next level, and you're gone up, and you've got a much broader perspective. in the materials, I've got some resources that you can go to, and I got was that a 10-minute sign? 10-minute, okay. I thought you were just happy, you know. In the materials, there's an article by Mark Rolig from Mass Mutual, and there's a series from Inside Counsel, and you can take a look at these if you're so inclined, but they talk about steps that you can take to acquire particular skills and timelines and when you might do it. And so this whole effort that we did was about skills and experiences for in-house lawyers and the GC of the future. What are some of them? Well, you have the legal skills. There's a whole debate, broad versus specific. My general conclusion on that is if you want to be a general counsel, you want as much experience in as many areas as you can get it. That's what I would say. And I certainly know of people who not only it may be within that experience, maybe within a particular industry or maybe outside the industry. I have several good friends who are on the ACC board, and one started in the mining industry and was general counsel of a natural resources company and is now general counsel of one of the biggest banks in Canada, from natural resources to banking. To me, that was a pretty big shift. Or you went from drug company to an airline, to running an airline, to a drugstore, to a car rental company. And so you handle all these large. So you see people going back and forth. So what that tells you, though, is when you see people going like that, they're not being brought in for their legal expertise in a particular field, in a particular industry. They're brought in because they have other particular skill sets to see. The business skills, talked about them, finance, accounting, understand the financial implications, ability to manage things. Leadership skills. This is, I think, you'll get quite a bit in a few minutes. But you can influence and you can inspire people. You can you can be a leader, and that's difficult. And one of the things, and I'll mention, and it's not talked about, but with leaders, there's also there's leadership and there's followership. And that is, good leaders need good followers. And most of you, everybody ascribes and wants to be a leader. But the fact of the matter is, most of us, myself, all of you, in one stage or another, or depending upon who you're dealing with, you're not the overall boss. You're a follower in some way. And as a follower, you've got responsibilities. And the major responsibility is for you is to help the leaders make good decisions. And that's when you have to, at times, speak up. And that's so, in the sense, you see the general counsel as a leader, but they're really a follower too. And when you see the scandals that have occurred, and there's this situation that's like, where were the lawyers? Well, frequently what happened was the lawyers were in positions where they rationalized decisions and they didn't speak up. And so the lawyers failed, the leaders failed because they did things that they shouldn't have done, but the lawyers failed as well because they didn't speak up. And so that's a followership. I mentioned the interpersonal skills. You'll get that with the next talk here, I think, and on emotional intelligence and empathy and how you can relate to people. And then the personal capabilities. Talked about those as well, that you need to have. Professional experiences, one of the hottest areas now. This is a very global world. Fact is, headhunters, companies are looking for people with global experience, and as well as experience in all the other types of areas that I have talked about. And if you can't get it within your organization, look to getting involved in an organization like ACC. Look to acquiring your skills, picking up on your business and accounting training and things. The chapter has a program coming up on a mini MBA program. If you're short on your business and your finance and accounting skills, go to take courses like that. The chapter has those. ACC itself has those kinds of things. Parting thoughts. The buckets of value remain. Strategy, it's only going to grow. Legal, price of entry. You can see it all there. Self-skills, rigorous self-assessment. If you want to be good, you've got to be able to be self-critical. If you want to be at the top of the game, you got to be able to be realistically self-critical and then willing to work to change and improve. And you see that in any I think, in any successful CLO. I think there's a few minutes left, so I'm happy. I'll conclude with the tagline: the successful GC of the future will be more than a lawyer, and so I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. Yes?
So that's a good lead into my question. So do you see, or are there any concerns about an essential conflict with lawyers getting more involved, not the trusted advisor role, but really the strategic and the business decisions, and the ability to maintain independence, integrity?
It is a challenge. It is an absolute challenge, yes. I mean, I don't know that I will call it a problem, but I will call it a challenge, and it's a basic attention. It has always existed. It has always been there, but as you take on more and more hats, it will exist, and it is there, and I don't think we can sugarcoat it. And it arises in context of things like, well, this question in the basic integrity and a conflict, are you willing? But also arises in areas like the attorney-client privilege and what will it exist. Of course, I had a number of GCs tell me that when they just assumed the privilege didn't exist, and they went on and at least when they were involved, and they structured their affairs accordingly. And so that is, I think that is a potential. It is a potential issue, and I think the bar in general has been slow in keeping up with changes in how the legal profession operates. That's a debate and a conversation for a whole nother day. But things like multidisciplinary practice and just practicing across in multiple jurisdictions and all of these things, those are all areas that all the pressures on the firms and value and how one relates with firms and how they bill and what you're billing. There's all types of ethical issues there. Actually, there's an interesting project going on at Harvard right now, and Ben Heineman and it seems appropriate, we're at the Harvard Club, David Wilkins. And they've got a project, if you go onto their website, you can find it, but they've got something going about looking to, trying to focus on the changing world and the ethics and how the interplay of that. Other questions? Thank you very much.